Welcome to See My Guest, a series about the human part of the ghost story. Here's how it works. I'm handed a file containing a story. A name, a rumor, sometimes just a handful of pages about someone who may or may not have ever really existed. No photo, no sketch, no description. Not yet anyway, just what's in the folder. Then it's time to draw a portrait. When I'm finished drawing, we'll set this portrait next to whatever's real. Hidden in each file is a folder containing a photograph, a painting, maybe an eyewitness account or description, whatever exists of this person's actual face. And we will see how close I got. But that's for later. Right now, let's talk about Chicago's very own murder castle and the man who lived in it. Alright, so we're in Chicago. It's 1893. The World's Fair is about to open. The White City, they're calling it. Gleaming buildings and electric lights are everywhere. This is basically the first time most people have ever seen such a thing. Not to mention the world's first Ferris wheel. 27 million people are about to pass through this thing. It's optimism, it's spectacle, it's America showing off. And just a few blocks away, in the neighborhood of Englewood, there's a man running a hotel who has already killed at least 9 people, possibly a lot more. And he built this building himself, specifically so he could. This is the story of H.H. Holmes, and the building people started calling the Murder Castle. Okay, first thing, H.H. Holmes wasn't even his real name. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett in New Hampshire in 1861. He's largely recounted as a smart kid, good at school, but there's this one story that gets repeated, and that is that other kids tried to scare him with a skeleton at a doctor's office, but instead of being scared, he was fascinated. Now, take that origin story with a grain of salt, honestly, because a lot of serial killer childhoods get retrofitted after the fact to quote-unquote explain things. But he did end up going to medical school at the University of Michigan, and that matters a lot for what comes next, because his first hustle wasn't murder, it was insurance fraud. He'd steal cadavers from the school's lab, disfigure them, and then use them to fake deaths and collect on life insurance policies. So before he ever killed anyone, that we know of at least, he had a certain set of skills, and he was clearly comfortable with dead bodies. He spent his early adulthood moving around using a Rolodex of aliases and eventually landed in Chicago in the mid-1800s under the name Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He got a job at a drugstore on the corner of 63rd and Wallace, run by a woman named Dr. Holton. Holton's husband is dying, Holmes is charming and capable, and, as is the pattern with him, the owner conveniently disappears shortly after her husband's demise. He tells everyone she moved away to live with relatives. He buys the store allegedly from her and just takes over. Now here's where it gets architectural, and honestly kind of impressive in the creepiest way, but across the street from the drugstore, Holmes buys a vacant lot and starts building. This building ends up being 3 stories tall and the size of a full city block. People in the neighborhood start calling it the castle just because of the sheer size of it. He never uses the same contractor twice. He hires and fires builders constantly, sometimes accusing them of shoddy work to avoid paying them, but the actual effect is that no single crew ever sees the whole floor plan. Only Holmes knows the whole layout. And the layout is the whole point. The ground floor is normal. Shops, his drugstore, a retail space, totally unremarkable. It's the upper 2 floors where things get weird. There are over 100 rooms with a whole series of unusual descriptions, like doors that only open from the outside, windows that look out onto brick walls instead of the outdoors, hallways that double back on themselves, a staircase that leads to nowhere, naturally, chutes running from the upper rooms straight down to the basement, which is super weird, and some rooms were found to have been lined with iron plate and gas lines that fed into them, that Holmes could control from his own bedroom. Meaning he could pump gas into a room and asphyxiate whoever was inside, then watch through a peephole as they die. The basement is where it turns fully industrial. He's got a dissection table down there, vats of acid, a kiln big enough to be used as a crematorium. He actually told people it was a furnace for a glass-blowing business venture, which, sure. And there was also surgical equipment. The idea, based on what investigators later pieced together, is that he wasn't only killing people, he was processing them, stripping skeletons and selling them to medical schools, which was actually a real semi-legitimate market at the time. So this wasn't only murder for murder's sake, it was murder with a business model. So the 1893 World's Fair was about to bring an unprecedented flood of visitors to Chicago, and a lot of them are young single women coming to the city alone for the first time, for work, for excitement, maybe a fresh start, and Holmes had turned part of the building into a hotel to rent rooms to them. Some become his employees, some mistresses. He was, by every account, an extremely effective con man who was also genuinely charming, which is kind of a common denominator in almost every serial killer story like this. So how many people actually? There are a couple of versions of the story, the couple of pop culture versions, that love to throw around a number like 200 victims. That's almost certainly wildly inflated. It comes from later sensationalized reporting and from the fact that Holmes himself, weirdly, confessed to 27 murders after he was caught. Then it turned out some of those people on the list were still alive. So he was definitely lying, possibly to inflate his own myth, possibly for a payday from selling his confession to a newspaper. What investigators could actually confirm was closer to 9 murders, though most historians think the real number is higher than that. Estimates commonly land somewhere between 20 and 30 confirmed plausible victims, still horrific, but not 200. The Murder Factory version of this story has taken on a life of its own because, well, it's a great story, and because Holmes himself was actively feeding the myth from his jail cell. But how did he actually end up in jail? Well, it wasn't the castle. It wasn't the lawless Chicago crime you hear about even now. It was insurance fraud, again. So Holmes had a longtime associate named Benjamin Pitzel. I hope I'm not screwing up his name. And the two of them cooked up a scheme. They'll fake Pitzel's death, collect a $10,000 life insurance payout, then split it. Except Holmes just actually killed him. Like really killed him and disfigured the body to make it look like an accident, and then collected the money anyway. Then it gets a little darker. Pitzel had a wife and 5 kids. Holmes convinces the widow to let 3 of the children travel with him, telling her he's reuniting them with their father, who is actually in hiding. Well, he drags these kids, Alice, Nellie, and Howard Pitzel, around multiple cities, using them as essentially a cover while he keeps moving. He kills all 3 of them along the way, and this is where a Pinkerton detective named Frank Geyer, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right too, enters the story, and honestly, he deserves his own episode. Geyer is assigned to finding the missing kids, and he does so in an incredibly dogged, methodical, city-by-city search, checking rental records, tracing aliases, and following a trail that Holmes thought was untraceable. Eventually, Geyer finds the children's remains, the 2 girls in a rented house in Toronto, buried in a trunk in the cellar, and the boys' remains in a house in Indianapolis, found in a chimney flue. That search is what actually unravels everything and leads police back to the building in Chicago. Holmes was arrested in Boston in November 1894 on the original insurance fraud charge before anyone even fully understood what they'd found in Chicago. When police finally go through the building, that's when the full scope starts to come out. The gas-pumped rooms, the chutes, the kiln, all of it. He's tried specifically for the murder of Benjamin Pitzel, convicted and executed by hanging in Philadelphia in May 1896. Even his execution has a creepy theatrical quality to it. As the story goes, his neck didn't snap cleanly, so death took longer than expected, and he'd specifically requested to be buried in a cement-lined coffin encased in concrete because he was afraid of being dissected after death, which, given everything, is a fascinating detail. The man who built a business dissecting other people was terrified of it happening to him post-mortem. The murder castle itself burned down under suspicious circumstances in 1895 while he was still awaiting trial. Never fully explained. The lot sat empty for decades and is a post office today. There's no plaque, nothing marking what happened there, just a regular Chicago post office on a regular street where a 100-room building full of trapdoors and gas chambers used to stand. I think part of why this story lingers is due to pop culture. You've got Eric Larson's book, The Devil in the White City. There have been documentaries. There's even been a movie in development for basically the past 20 years. And the intrigue makes sense, doesn't it? Because you've got this moment of total gleaming electric light optimism about the future. And then you've got this man quietly running a killing operation, practically in its shadow, using the fair itself as bait. It's the ultimate something goes wrong underneath the shiny surface story, and it happens to be true, or true enough. For some reason, charm and competence always get read as trustworthiness. Everyone who met Holmes, landlord, business partners, women, even the parents of the 3 kids he killed, described him the same way. Charming, reasonable, believable. That's arguably the scarier part of the story than the kiln in the basement. In the end, the horror is in the mediocrity of being just another face in the crowd. This face, however, is now immortalized. What do you think? Do you see the resemblance? Can you see my murderous guest? I'll see you at the next sitting.